Hi, it's Sue Piccolini again, Director of Training and Risk Management. The way you fill out the paperwork is going to have a lot to do with the smoothness of your transactions and the longevity of your career. Because quite frankly, if you haven't heard it, there happen to be some people known as attorneys that like to look over our paperwork and see if we've done anything wrong. And we don't want that to happen. And so we're going to go a little further in the contract for this session together. And it happens to be the part of the contract is basically pre-printed. Have you ever gotten a contract or an agreement, let's say when you're going to be leasing a car? You read every single line in that lease. I don't know about you, but after about page 4, I'm totally befuddled as to what is in that particular contract. Well, our buyers want us to know the contract, and our sellers need to know that we know the contract. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to keep it away from them. In fact, as I stated in an earlier class, when you're working with buyers, you'll find out that buyers are not liars. You will find out that agents just don't ask the right questions. And so I do a buyer consultation. And during that consultation, I'm not only going to be giving them information as to what we're going to be doing in finding a piece of property, but I'm going to give them a copy up front of the exact contract that we will be filling in together when they find that house. So it won't be the first time that they've seen the contract. I usually hand them that copy of the contract along with a number of other items, ask them many questions to find out what they want and must have in a new piece of property, and a highlighter, and maybe a little background information that I can get from the California Association of Realtors regarding some of the items that may be here or in the future. Now, I believe that it's an equal opportunity profession. And I think that the seller should be seeing a copy of the purchase contract before he sees it when he's sitting with his listing agent and it's filled in by an eager buyer who wants to buy his property. And not good if that's the first time he's seen it. If you're a listing agent or a selling agent, you need to go over that contract with your clients so that when we are prepared to write the offer or read the offer, our client is not going to be out of the loop. We can go through it quickly. They are ready for questions that they may have. We certainly will go over what the contract does and does not do. And so one of the big things in our contract, obviously, is the condition of the property. Some of you have probably heard of as is. This property is sold as is and in its present current condition. Well, most properties are sold that way, and that's not a problem. When you see that, it means that Mr. Seller is probably telling you he's not going to do any repairs on the property. You're going to have the opportunity to investigate the property. He's also under the law to give you disclosures regarding what he knows about the property. But basically, he's going to be selling it to you in as-is condition. Well, what do I recommend on as-is condition? I recommend that your client invest in an independent physical inspection of the property. In fact, get that information to them when you're doing your consultation as to how they should be calling physical inspection companies, what they have, and again, what they don't have. They need to have specific and general liability insurance. They need to have errors and omissions insurance. They need to understand if damage has been done to the property during the course of their investigation. They've got it in writing that they'll be taking care of that. But they're going to be looking at the entire property, areas that I don't go in. I don't go in the attics. I don't go under the house. And quite frankly, they may be finding some things that Mr. Seller didn't even know about. And that happens lots of times under the house when there's some plumbing problems that are just maybe starting, but it is leaking. Well, we're buying the property as is. We're buying that leak unless we decide that we want to ask the seller to do something about that. In other words, perhaps do a repair on it. And we have forms to do that, and we can get them over to the seller, and he can make that decision on those items that were found during this physical inspection that he is willing to take care of, or those items that he is not willing to take care of. Obviously, you, the buyer, your buyer, needs to do their own investigation of the property, because sometimes what they consider important is maybe not so important to you or to me. We as agents, I'm sure you all know that, and we'll be getting around to that during our really extensive disclosure class. That's where the attorneys really have their little ears perk up and make sure that we have disclosed to their clients all that there is to be known by the parties that should know. Well, it's not necessarily you that's going to have all that information. You as a licensee are only held to the terms of your license. We are to do a diligent, that means not going la-di-da with your radio turned on and wishing you weren't there. No, a diligent visual inspection of all accessible areas of the house. So for me, I don't have to go up in the attic, and definitely I'm not going under the house, but that's my obligation under the law in the state of California. This particular physical inspector is not under that type of situation. He's the one who needs to be there and find all of those things that are inherent in this piece of property at this time. Once we have all of that information, and certainly Mr. Buyer has the right to conduct even on his own investigations. I know Uncle Bob is trying to be very helpful, but remember sometimes Uncle Bob could fall down maybe on that tile roof while he's looking at it, and guess who's going to be responsible for any of the repair? Yes, it says right in here in our contract that Mr. Buyer will be responsible for that. So, getting back to that physical inspection, have it done within 72 hours after acceptance. That means total acceptance of your offer. And it comes in handy right now for us to find out what is and what is not going on with the house. And it also helps us when we do our final walkthrough. We then ask Mr. Seller, and if he's kind enough to say that he will repair the plumbing that is under the house, then at your final walkthrough, I'm going to suggest that you tell that same inspector, I want you to come over to the property. We're doing our final walkthrough. The buyer and myself are not going under the house, but Mr. Seller has agreed that he will repair those items that you pointed out in your investigation. And now we have the physical inspector going under to make sure that those things have been taken care of. Another part of our contract says, Mr. Seller, you must provide the invoices if you have done any repairs to the property so that it can be proven that yes, you did it. If there happens to be a problem with the repairs, our buyer would have some recourse against that third-party person. So, condition of the property, obviously, very important, very easy for us to satisfy ourselves, and it's all contractually there. At this time, sometimes I get people say, are we still in the contract? Yes, our contract is a roadmap as what's going to happen in this transaction. To begin with, we're going to say about those contingencies. We're going to have a certain amount of days when they are going to be in place protecting us. And then after that period of time, then we are supposed to remove our contingency, or if we can't live with what the seller says he can live with, then we need to cancel the transaction. A number of years ago, the section in our contract that is now a lot of pre-printed was not pre-printed, and it came about because our legal staff wanted to make sure that you being new agents were going to be protected under the contract. And how is that? It means we have the pre-printed. It tells Mr. Buyer to do all of these investigations and what kind of an investigation to do, on and on and on. And legally, on these pages, these 10 pages, 9 of them are not total signature pages, we have our client initial the bottom of each one of those pages. What does that say? It says legally, I read the page, I understood the page, and I agree to it. Now you know, and I know, you're the person that is going to have more credence and credibility as to what is in this contract and how we are going to protect them in this transaction. There is a paragraph in our contract that I need to tell you almost line by line. It's one of the fabulous paragraphs in our contract, and it addresses time periods, removal of those contingencies, and the cancellation rights. When I started in the business, we had no vehicle, we had no way of a seller basically canceling a transaction. He was in it for the long haul. On the 45th day, if it turned out that the buyers were not buying the property, he would be probably the first to know after the buyers, because we had not told him along the way what was really happening in this transaction. Under this particular contract, we have those contingency removals, and we do them in writing, and we send a copy of that removal to the seller so he can see what's happening. As I told you, we have contractual obligations for our buyers, and right at the very beginning, the one I talked about before, is about getting that deposit into escrow. I'm sure when you think about it, you would want the same thing. They said they were going to put that deposit into escrow within 3 days, and we're looking at day 10, and it's not there. Well, under the old contracts, what would happen? Well, quite frankly, under the old contracts, there wasn't too much that we could do, except yell, scream, and what have you. But this contract provides that we are to get a notice to perform. That means Mr. Seller can send us, the buyer, a notice to perform, give us the amount of days that are stipulated in the contract, and if we do not perform, Mr. Seller now has the authority of the contract to cancel and go find a new buyer that is more willing to go according to the time frames. Up to this time, Mr. Seller has actually been shouldering all of the responsibility for the transaction. And so you can see and you can understand why Mr. Seller is going to look closely at you removing those contingencies. And so when we see that we are past the time of the contingency removal, in writing, you, Mr. Buyer, told me you were willing to do your investigation for the loan, for the physical inspection within 21 days. And you promised to Mr. Seller that that is what you would do. On day 25, Mr. Seller has not received anything in writing from you that you are removing that contingency or that you are canceling the transaction. So under the way we do things, under active contingency removal now, and please remember, all of our contracts are handled under active. That means in writing. That means that our buyer has to physically, in writing, put down that he is canceling the transaction or that he's removing the contingencies. But up until that time, Mr. Seller is standing on the sidelines. He's now waited. Now he's mad at his listing agent. Now he's upset. What does he need to know that he can do? He needs to know that he can issue a notice to perform to the buyer and give the buyer the amount of time that was agreed upon in the contract, either 2, 3, 4, 5 days. At the end of that, it doesn't say in that notice that he will cancel. I like to call it a little wake-up call. for the buyer. Oops, you had dumb Dora or stupid Sam as your agent. They didn't know where you were in the transaction. But at least you got a wake-up call from the seller. Hey, we noticed you haven't done what you said you were going to do. And in that particular document it says, if you do not respond, if you do not reply, if you do not take the contractual action or remove that contingency, we may, it never says we will, but we may cancel the transaction. So I think it's a really fair and balanced contract. I think that buyers and sellers should be happy with this contract because it covers everything that they need to know on the transaction process. And again, that's the reason why it's 10 pages long. We have to put into the contract that Mr. Seller will keep the utilities on. Until when? Until occupancy is delivered. We found out that if you turn on and turn off the electricity or the gas, sometimes it doesn't go back on that well. And so in our contract says, Mr. Owner, don't do that. We will have a smooth transition of those utilities. It also is going to tell us that you have the right to do that investigation. It's also the contract going to tell you that not only do you have the right for that initial investigation, but towards the end of the transaction, you're going to have the right to have a final walkthrough. That final walkthrough is going to be the one where you go in and make sure that a truck has not driven through the side of the property. You go through, make sure that the systems are still working. You make sure that the property is in substantially the same condition as when the offer was accepted. Now here's where that early inspection, 72 hours after your offer's been accepted, can come in. You turn on the main appliances that are going on in that property, and I found that the longest one is usually your dishwasher. And so you start that cycle for the dishwasher. And the dishwasher sounds wonderful, and you're going and checking some other things out, when all of a sudden you hear clunk, 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 and it continues doing it and finally turns on. Uh-oh, what's happened? Well, the dishwasher's not working. Well, probably this is going to be whose problem at this point in time? Well, based on our physical inspection, the dishwasher was working back there. 72 hours after our offer was accepted, that dishwasher was working. And now it's not. Now it is the seller's responsibility to take care of that. As I like to say, don't jump in when you're doing a final walkthrough and say, oh my goodness, the seller has to take care of that and that and that. I'm reminded of a young couple who were living with her parents along with 3 children. And yes, the same thing happened. The dishwasher was not working for our final walkthrough. And I learned to keep my mouth shut because I'm not the person who is buying this piece of property. They are the ones that are buying the property, and they are the ones who will make these decisions. And so I was quiet until the husband said, doesn't look like the dishwasher's in good condition. And what else could I say? Looks that way. What would you like to do? Well, I'm going to tell you this. I'm living with my in-laws, and over a crummy dishwasher, I'm not stopping this transaction. I'll go ahead and accept it the way it is. That doesn't always happen. But in that case, if I had jumped in there and said, oh, I'm sure you want me to get in touch with the seller, he's going to have to do something, etc., I would not be serving my client to the best of my ability. I needed to find out what he wanted done. In those situations, most of the time, the buyer wants that taken care of. And so you will get on the phone, you will call the seller's agent and say, we have a problem. The dishwasher is not functioning. They may come back and say, well, how do you know that it wasn't broken when your offer was accepted? And then you come back and say, we had that independent inspection of the property within 72 hours of the offer being accepted. And so that means that something happened between then and now, And yes, it is your seller's responsibility. What usually happens is Mr. Seller wants out just as quickly as anyone wants in, and so he will start throwing some money at that particular item, saying, just let escrow, give us a call, we'll authorize $700 for a replacement. Is that okay? I turn to my buyers and ask them, is that going to be okay with you? Some other things that are in our contract, and there's a lot more that I haven't gone over in this particular presentation. As I said, when you're with me for about 6 hours on just the purchase contract, we will go line by line, concept by concept, paragraph by paragraph, and unintended consequences. Sometimes an agent thinking they're doing the right thing may not be doing the right thing. Always when there's going to be a contingency put in place, it needs to be in the contract. And because this market has been one of those where buyers don't want to miss out in getting the property, they may tell you, we don't want any contingencies, we don't want any of those. I'm going to warn you on that. I want you to explain to the buyer that they need to have an independent investigation of the property. They need to make sure they're going to get that loan. And if they need to cut down that contingency protection period to a few days, I at least want you to do it. And sometimes they'll say no. Get it in writing on another piece of paper that your buyers have decided that they are not going to have that independent physical inspection of the property. Because as long as I've been in the business, I find that sometimes buyers have amnesia. And we get to the end of the transaction, and we didn't put in our paperwork that we wanted a contingency for investigation. And we knew that the dining room light fixture was not going to be included, but we knew they knew it wasn't going to be included, so we didn't take the time to write it down. Buyer's aware that the dining room light fixture is not included in the transaction, and will replace it after the close of escrow. Now, they tend to forget those things, and so we get to the close of escrow, and they move in and they find out, uh-oh, I think there's some things we should have addressed. Unintended consequences. You thought you were doing a good thing for your buyer, that they would certainly get this property, but what happens after the close of escrow? They find out something is very, very wrong with the property. They find out that perhaps they should have had an appraisal of the property. They find out that maybe they paid a little more for the property than would have come out with an appraisal. And I'm going to tell you that they will probably blame you for that situation. So when you're going through and dealing with your clients, not only do you want to go line by line, paragraph by paragraph, concept by concept, and consequences of their actions, you're going to want to make sure that everyone is aware of things that could happen that might be detrimental to them. I know all of you are looking forward to the close of a transaction and getting your commission. Listen, we work. Everyone works for a reward, and our reward is that we get paid. This is our job. And our job means that we are going to pay close attention to the pivotal contract that we will come in contact with, and that's going to be the purchase contract. Last thing I want to talk to you about, again, is that situation where we have requests for repairs. And our contract almost says, yes, we'll do that, and then the contract says, wait a minute, he doesn't have to do that. So, when we're looking at condition of the property in the contract, it says as one of the things that a buyer can do is he can request, and this happens to be in paragraph 11, it says that the buyer conducts his investigations and then he may cancel right then and there. Not good, not good. But he also, in paragraph 11b, has the right, it says right here, to request that the seller make repairs or take other action. Oh, okay, great. Well, we had our inspection and we're in transaction, because remember, we're not going to be putting this independent physical inspection in play until we have a totally accepted contract. So here we are, 10, 15 days down the road. We've had a physical inspection, and the physical inspector has found some things that might prevent our buyer from living in the property and being able to afford the repair of those items. When I say that, I want you to remind your clients that they're not going to get a brand new home, that they are simply having that independent physical inspection to find out about those major things that could be a problem. Well, Mr. Seller needs to take care of that. Well, we keep looking in our contract, and I'm looking in paragraph 14 again. In paragraph 14B2, it says, the buyer may request that seller make repairs or take any other action regarding the property. What does that mean? Maybe lowering the price. But then it goes on to say, and this is the way it's been for as long as I've been in the business, since the 1970s, Mr. Seller has no obligation to agree to or even respond to a buyer's request for repairs. So remember that when you're working with your buyer. Tell them when they're having that independent physical inspection what the heart of that is to find out really what's going on with this house. And all houses are going to have something that's going on that maybe a buyer's not real happy with. The things we're looking at on that are things that are material enough they could not safely live in the property or could not afford to live in the property. And so we see in our contract, buyer has the right to ask, Mr. Seller has the right to say no. And when your buyer's making the decision to go forward, he needs to go with items that are in writing. In writing, Mr. Seller says, yes, I'll take care of that. In writing. We don't go on the seller's agent says, oh, he'll take care of that. It doesn't hold up in law, and it probably doesn't hold up in too many relationships. He said, she says, we need to have it in writing. Well, get excited about the contract. It's going to work no matter what client you have, a buyer or a seller, and you've just seen the tip of the iceberg, and you're going to love it. It's a balanced contract, and your clients are going to love it as well.